let's do best Lions team that we've actually watched. And we have our own parameters about what qualifies as that, and we'll get into those as we talk about them. AJ is going to start us off with his, and AJ does have a longer frame of reference than I do, although not much longer. Even if he looks a lot older than me, he's really not.
Look, man, a couple kids, a few different careers, a couple moves in the life will give you gray hair sooner than you want gray hair, and bad genetics will give you a shiny head instead of a head full of hair like you have. So it just is what it is. I have been around a little bit longer than you. And when I started to think about, okay, we talk about best team in our lifetime, right? It is one of those situations that you got to go back to, when was the last time the team had success? And what do we define success as? Well, for me, you look at a team that was the last team to win a playoff game, which would be the 1991 Detroit Lions. You're talking about guys on this team like Chris Spielman, Benny Blades on the defense, talking about Barry Sanders, Eric Kramer, but we'll talk a little bit about him. We're talking about receivers, Brett Perryman. Andre Ware was also on this team, though it didn't get much run. And so this is a team that throughout the regular season, they had bookend games with the Washington Redskins is how their season ultimately unfolded. They started the season off with a 45-0 loss to the Washington Redskins. Then they ended their season in the conference championship with a 41-10 loss against the Washington Redskins.
I'm going to be honest, AJ, you're not selling me on how great this team was yet. You better pick it up.
Well, hold on. I'm getting there. Now, when we talk about those two bookend losses, yeah, they were pretty bad, okay? 45-0 to start the season, 41-10 to end the season, but they were in the conference championship game, and they lost. That Washington Redskins team is the team that ultimately put a hurting on the Buffalo Bills in the 1992 Super Bowl as well, and we're Super Bowl champs. We're talking about the ultimate champions here, right? That's who they played. That's who they faced. But this team, after they lost to the Redskins, went out, won 5 straight. Then they lost to the 49ers, okay? Then they went for a stretch, they lost 2 out of their next 3, and then won out the rest of the season to finish the season at 12-4. And they were carried along by a defense that was a very much bend but don't break defense. They were a league ranking in total yards of 11th in the NFL. They were carried primarily by a guy that you know and love very well, Barry Sanders. When you talk about best teams, you also have to talk about best players on those teams, which I know you're going to get to when you talk about your team. But this team is one of the greatest Lions teams that's ever played, because this team did what very few Lions teams have done since 1957, and that's win football games. When you're talking about winning stretches of games where they win 5 in a row from week 2 to week 6, and then they win another from week 12 through week 17, capping off the season with an overtime win against the Buffalo Bills, who were the Super Bowl runners-up. You're talking about a pretty good football team, a team that went 12-4. Now, they had a game manager, Eric Kramer. He was not a huge statistics guy, only threw for 1,600 yards on the season, but guess what? When you're turning around and handing the ball to number 20, you really don't need to have much more than a game manager. So when I talk about...
An era too, where your quarterback didn't have to carry you to kind of talk, because it's when we talk about in modern times, not as many Joe Flacco's have won Super Bowls recently. It's happened. We know Eli Manning won 2, and he's probably going to get into the Hall of Fame because of that, even though he shouldn't sniff it. Right. But in the modern, really the passing era, the last 10, 15 years especially, it sounds, oh my gosh, your quarterback only threw for 1,600 yards. That's horrible. Right. You must not have been a good team. But this is a completely different era of football. This is an era of football where a fullback could go in the first round. As Lions fans, I believe it was the Lions that took a fullback in the first round, wasn't it? I think it was. I'd have to go back and look. I didn't mean to pop quiz you here. I'm pretty sure it was the Lions that took a fullback in the first round way back when. But it's just a very different era of football. So it's not only that you had Barry Sanders, who, in my opinion, and listen, I didn't live through Barry Sanders' whole career. I did not. But I've done my homework, as the kids like to say. I've hopped on the Google. But what I really mean is that, listen, I've watched a ridiculous amount of film on Barry Sanders. And I have a lot of the old greats because growing up as a kid in learning the game, in hearing the stories of these older players, of course you wanted to do that. And when the infancy of YouTube came out, in the early stages of the internet, when people are sharing things on forums, it was fun to watch all these old tapes, and not everything's more readily available now. Much easier to get your hands on. But we watch films on all the greats, and I would say, listen, I haven't watched every snap of every great running back ever. Of course I haven't. But for my money, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better running back than Barry Sanders. So you talk about the era that it wasn't the passing league it was today, and you have a back like Sanders. Your quarterback only throwing for 1,600 yards isn't necessarily a detriment to your team.
It's not a detriment to their team. And if you think about it,
that he was bad.
And truthfully, I mean, he did throw for more touchdowns than he did interceptions, which we know that's not how you judge a quarterback. But he threw for 11 touchdowns that year, which when you talk about a different era of football and you say that a conference champion runner-up's quarterback threw for 11 touchdowns on the season, you think, how did that happen? Sanders, talking about how great he was, over 1,500 yards on just over 300 attempts, averaged 4.5 yards a carry, and had 16 touchdowns on the season. So you're talking about the perfect situation for a team that was built around a all-time running back. They could then use play action to get the ball to your Brett Perrimans, could rely on a defense that was anchored by Chris Spielman and had Benny Blades in the back, covering the top of the defense, things like that. So when we talk about these good teams and we look at these good teams in Lions history, there's very few to pick from. And so when we pick one, and I say the 1991 team that went to the conference championship, and yes, they ended up losing and ultimately did not get to the promised land, but they ended up losing to the eventual Super Bowl champs. I'm going to go with the best team in my lifetime is the one that had the most success, being the 1991 Detroit Lions. Man on a mission, I'ma get it. You know I be on a way. Yeah. You know I be on the way.